Pony Express long-haul space freighter Tulpar. Crew, 5. Planned shipment duration, 382 days. Elapsed transit time, 147 days. I hope this hurts.
Before we do get into it, I just want to give a brief trigger warning for this episode because there's going to be a lot of topics that are sad and bad. So we're going to be talking today about stuff along the lines of
YouTube monetization. YouTube monetization.
YouTube monetization.
Cannibalism as well. So if any of those are topics that you can't handle for whatever reason, then maybe, sit this one out and I'll catch you on the next one, okay? All right, everyone who remains, you're a sick
YouTube monetization.
I agree, Obi, thank you. But for those who remain, prepare yourselves as we delve in to mouthwashing. As the opening text fades, we are left with a wish. I hope this hurts. The audio then skips and we are sort of phased into a new scene. The text 0 days flashes before the screen, and a warning about an oncoming collision comes in through the computers. We ignore the warning and are forced to pull the ship deeper into the collision course. The ship blares another warning across the screen, and the autopilot takes over the controls. We are also docked 4,000 credits for the entire crew because of this mistake. Observing the panels, we spy a large red button locked behind a plate of glass and a keyhole to go with it. Standing up, there's not much to look at. Interacting with a nearby laptop, our saboteur mutters to themselves, there's nothing to be done. Obi. Bro is purring right into the mic. I wonder if it can pick it up. Directly across the laptop sits a utility locker. Inside, we find that there's a missing Pony Express protection kit and an emergency key. We also find the employee card of a woman by the name of Anya. Returning to the seat, we take the key labeled Captain Only and slot it into place before turning the mechanism. The lid lifts without a sound, and we are prompted to disengage the autopilot. Doing so causes the screen to flash with a warning, and the ship enters into emergency mode. Red lights flash across the console, and the computer warns of the imminent crash. Leaving our seat, we stumble through the halls of the ship, passing by Pony Express posters and glowing emergency lights. As we move through the corridors, the posters begin to appear more and more, haphazardly splattering across the walls. The bulbs begin to dim, and a flashlight comes out to guide our way through the long metallic veins of the ship. Hitting a locked door, we are forced to turn around before once again running into a roadblock. A round horse mascot stands statuesque in the middle of the doorway, blocking our access, so we're forced to double back. As the lights flicker on and off, and ambient sounds warble in the atmosphere, the impossible geometry of the place leads us back into the arms of our sweet pony friend, looking a little more handy than the last time we saw him. Gas and sparks fill the air as we stumble through the dark and sporadic blinks of light. Voices laugh and grumble in our head until the alarms begin to blare. We round a corner and carry further into the dilapidating halls until we meet back with the door to the cockpit. We reach out our hand, and the door is locked. We turn. Our pony is with us. A baby cries, and the world turns white. That is the opening to Mouthwashing. As we are introduced to the non-linear storytelling of the game, we actually find ourselves now 2 months before the crash. This opening segment immediately sets such a tone for this game, and I think perfectly introduces the player to a lot of the themes that are going to be built up upon over the 3-hour runtime. And it is here in our first flashback that we are introduced to our 4 main characters. There's Swansea, an older, rotund man with a gruff attitude and an affinity for mechanics. Daisuke, his young, inexperienced assistant. Anya, the medical bay's quiet doctor, and Jimmy, our playable character for most of the game, who is acting captain of the now ruined vessel. Anya mentions a scanner device that can be used to unlock the bay, but only the captain has access. Swansea jokes that we can go and ask him for the scanner mockingly, but Jimmy is adamant he can figure out where it is. For better or for worse, he is the captain now. We take control of Jimmy and now have free access to move around the ship. It's clear right away that the Tulpar and its crew are barely holding together. A foam-like substance is sprayed haphazardly all along the ship's walls, and a worryingly small collection of food is stockpiled on the table. We talk to Daisuke, who sits under a digital rendition of a sunset, the summer colors cascading out into the room, filling it with an otherworldly sense of warmth. Daisuke lets us know that we have 4 months of food left, but seeing as we have far less than that remaining in air supply, it doesn't bother Jimmy too much. Daisuke seems upbeat and hopeful about the current situation, remarking how excited he is to get home and eat a big meal, maybe even get to be on TV. Jimmy is skeptical, but goes along and jokes with Daisuke anyway. Before pressing on to search for the scanner, I decided to check up on Anya in the infirmary, where ex-Captain Curly was also staying. Lying supine on a medical cot, Curly watches us with a single bright blue eye beneath ever-stained bandages. His lips are burned back enough to reveal a set of dazzling white teeth, and he appears to have been relieved of his limbs. Anya looks visibly dour with large, sad eyes and a near-constant frown. She hugs herself with her arms and regards Jimmy as he enters the room. Anya needs Curly to be administered pain medication, but she's too squeamish of the process to do so. Jimmy relents and feed him the meds. Approaching the former captain, we can hear every wheezing breath fighting to escape his smoke-scarred lungs. What's left of Curly watches unblinking, with a bulbous blue eye, naked of its lashes and lids. We part his remaining maw, and respectfully shove the pill down his throat. Anya takes her leave, and we begin. After the process, when Jimmy goes to leave, he chides Anya for wasting the pain meds on Curly, and they have the following conversation.
Why do you think he did it?
Does it matter? What answer would make you feel any better?
I have to believe that our worst moments don't make us monsters, Jim. I have to, even in his case.
Anya bids us off with a bout of nausea, and we step away to find the scanner. It's here where we are given what I would say is our first clue to who crashed the ship, Curly being the ex-captain, now a burnt husk of a meat man, maybe because he was the one in the cockpit who sustained the most injuries. I would assume that the cockpit is at the front of the ship, and if you're crashing headfirst into something and the cockpit is there, then the person in the cockpit is going to take the most damage. I feel like that just makes sense. So it is a wonder that he is still alive and allegedly is the one who crashed the ship. We'll learn more about why and whatnot later. Heading out into the corridors, we see the fine and firm Swansea standing in front of the utility room. If we approach, Jimmy will ask an ornery Swansea what exactly he's been working on, and we're told that the utility room is covered in a wall of foam. Swansea has been hacking at it to see if he can salvage anything useful, but to no avail. He has to work carefully lest he breaks the air seal and just fucking kills everybody on board. He's letting nobody, captain or the teeny bopper, Daisuke, anywhere near where an accident might occur. Locked from the utility room, we head down the corridor towards the cockpit to find it has been extensively foamed. On the ground lies the scanner we've been looking for, and upon picking it up, we are instructed to go to the hold. The cargo stands firmly locked with our fellow shipmates. Sorry, Curly, not you, obviously. Anxiously awaiting the access code. Anya prays for survival supplies while Swansea stands by placidly and Daisuke hopes for spare parts to fix the ship. With their hopes in mind, we scan the code from the door and punch it in. The blast doors unclasp with a mechanical hiss, and then we find ourselves 7 days before the crash, witnessing a conversation between Captain Curly and Anya. They're talking about a psych eval test that the Pony Express forces the nurse to conduct, but she worries about bringing it up with Jimmy. Jimmy?
He acts as if I do these things for fun. Then I have to make a report with things like I have found myself sexually excited at the sight of cartoon horses.
Captain Curly offers to and go conduct it for her. On the way, we stop off with Jimmy, Swansea, and Daisuke in the utility room, where there seems to have been an accident. Jimmy stands outside the room, remarking that we could either see what the issue is, or leave Swansea and Daisuke to their hijinks. Curly, being the captain, chooses the former. Inside, we find Daisuke waist-deep in foam and Swansea bemoaning the ineptitude of his assistant. It seems Daisuke set off the emergency foam while messing with a faulty air vent. We unlock the axe and cut our dear junior mechanic out of his white, fluffy prison. Swansea berates Daisuke and warns him that the vents are strictly off limits due to structural failure. You looking to get impaled, electrocuted, and cooked. Daisuke reminds him that out of the two of them, he is the only one who can actually fit in the vent, and Swansea calmly asks Curly for the axe. With a warning to keep things in check, we leave them to their work and pull Jimmy aside for his psych eval. As we leave to meet him in the cockpit, however, the player finds themselves in an impossibly long staircase stretching down into darkness. At the end, we find a door, behind which is nothing but a drop into the abyss. With nowhere to go, we plunge forward. At the bottom, we splash down in red water, surrounded in black. The sky begins to alight with galaxies and stars swirling overhead. In the vast nothingness around us, emergency warnings spring into existence, lapping over each other as metal framework stabs out from the blood ocean beneath. Alarms blare louder and louder, and a sunrise bursts into light. As we come to, we now find ourselves in the cockpit with Jimmy. We have a quick fade to black as they go over the evaluation and rejoin the conversation as Curly asks how Jimmy is liking the job off the record. Jimmy confesses that he likes the feeling of being in control of the ship rather than being on Earth. Jimmy takes the opportunity to also express frustration in Curly's recent mood, despite how much everyone on the ship seems to talk up his performance as the leader. Curly admits he has been having doubts of what his position means, if it's enough. He wants to be satisfied as a good freight captain, but wonders if that's the highest point he will ever reach. Jimmy remarks that if the highest rung of the ladder isn't enough, perhaps he wants to switch which ladder he's climbing altogether. All the while, Jimmy himself is struggling to climb that which Curly is contemplating leaving behind for greener pastures. It's here that we start to see the cracks in Jimmy and Curly's relationship before the crash. There seems to be some animosity that Jimmy harbors towards Curly for being in a sort of station above the rest of his crew. Captain Curly tells his co-pilot that he believes in him before the conversation is interrupted by a message from corporate. Jimmy leaves, and as we pick up the paper and go to read it, the world fades away once again. Words flash upon the screen in a jumbled mess, and we find ourselves deep in the cargo, surrounded by shelves of boxes. At the end of the corridor lies a small, old-fashioned television playing thematically relevant old cartoons and strange shorts. Flipping through the channels, we are stopped on a commercial for Dragon Breath mouthwash. In fine text at the bottom of the end screen, it reads, "Dragon Breath CO will not accept responsibility for any harm caused by use of this product." Then the vision fades, and we find ourselves 2 months after the crash in the cargo hold. We have been shipping nothing but Dragon Breath brand mouthwash. Every box is filled with the stuff, and the 5-man crew of the Tulpar is expected to spend over a year traveling to get them wherever they're going. Now they're most likely going to die on that journey with nothing but mountains of mouthwash to keep them company, hence the name of the game. Anya points out that the product that they're shipping can't even be used for disinfectant, but Swansea delights in the 14% ethanol content. Swansea takes a big swig of the blue liquid and says goodbye to 15 years of sobriety. Swansea offers Daisuke a drink, while Anya sobs into her hands, and we find ourselves back 6 days before the crash. We resume control of Captain Curly, letter from corporate now in hand, and walk into surprise! It's a surprise party, the entire crew donning birthday hats and clapping at Curly's entrance. Turns out it's not actually Curly's birthday, but rather they're only allowed to throw one party a year, and it's his turn. Unfortunately, the captain is the only one with clearance, so we do have to make our own cake. Once the ingredients are put together, we sit at the table with our crew and somberly explain to them what's happened. Turns out, Pony Express has finally gone under. Seems the extreme measures that corporate was taking acted as a bandage to far more serious issues, and while they are getting paid for this trip, this is the Tulpar's final shipment. Curly also mentions that corporate wanted him to wait until the end of the haul, but he decided to, and tells the crew immediately. Jimmy is fucking pissed. He sees this as exactly what Curly wanted, a way out, but with no guilt. And the only ones who are actually having the rug pulled out from under them are the rest of the crew. The argument between Curly and Jimmy ends with a request to have some fucking cake. So we take the knife and begin to saw through the layers. As the cake shimmers away, we find ourselves waking up in a cot on the floor 3 months after the crash. Curly is moaning in pain, and we are instructed to go and check up on him. We realize that we're unsure if Curly has already been given his pain meds though, so we leave to go find Anya. At this point, Curly has been living practically degloved and limbless for way longer than I would expect anybody to be able to. He's basically subsisting entirely off of grit and Vicodin. I don't even fully understand how he's getting any food or nutrients, and frankly, nor do I. Leaving Curly to his wailing, you big fucking crybaby, we find Anya in the cockpit with Swansea. When she sees us, Anya turns to hide her face. Jimmy asks why they're talking after curfew, and notes that Anya is crying. She admits that Curly's meds slipped her mind, and Jimmy lets her know he'll take care of it. Before we leave, we note that Swansea is still holding the fire axe Curly unlocked for him. Swansea shrugs off Jimmy, claiming that he's just holding on to it out of habit. With nothing left to do but go get them back to their rooms, we return to Curly. With nothing left but to let them just go back to their rooms, we return to Curly. Once again, we respectfully force the painkillers down his throat. Jimmy bemoans his position with the crew and murmurs something about not knowing what he could say to them or how a certain she would react. With no answers, we feed Curly his medication. We fade again, now back to the kitchen, bathed in dull red light. Curly sits alone at the table with a cake in front of him and piles of mouthwash surrounding the personal party. In this dreamlike conversation, Curly and Jimmy talk about the worth of a mediocre cake. Jimmy wonders why it would even be worth having a slice, but Curly feels differently. I've thought so many times, is this what peace feels like? And is it good enough? If I'm being real, it certainly isn't the best. All I can do is try to make my life one that I'm not trying to run from all the time. Sometimes I'll be promoted, buy a house, fall in love. But other times I'll just have some awful fucking cake with my friend. Right now that sounds pretty brilliant. Yeah. This conversation shows just how wide of a gap there is between Jimmy and Curly as leaders, where Curly has this holistic view. Jimmy's is myopic. He only seems to see the mediocre shit in front of him, whereas Curly both sees the cake and the friend he's sharing it with. With not much more to say, we head through the halls of the ship to collect something to cut the cake. The ship is aglow with the languid glare of red light, barely illuminating our way. From the cockpit, we pull a bloody axe buried into a bloody seat. Eyes stare down at us from the monitors, and we stare back as we head to the kitchen once again. As the music swells in our ears like rushing water, the door opens to a silence and a single staring eye on the now cracked monitor. Curly lies waiting for us on the table, and all we can do is take the axe and... We find ourselves in the cargo 4 months after the crash. Bottles of mouthwash lie scattered around empty boxes, and we are instructed to check on the crew. In the small living room under the sunset screen, we find Swansea swinging away to music with the fire axe still clutched in his hand. He is belligerently drunk. Anya is in the kitchen, staring down a bottle of mouthwash. She jumps in alarm when we call her name. She tells us that there may be some extra medical supplies stuck behind some foam in the hallway, so we go to grab the axe from Swansea. He digs at Jimmy, saying that the axe is a big responsibility given to him by the previous captain, something Jimmy should know all about. Jimmy insists Swansea hand over the axe, and he relents, saying, "Take matters into your own hands, eh? Be my guest." We take the embedded axe from the now shattered sunset and head off to free more painkillers from the hall. After hacking away at the foam, we find a whole stash of pain meds and isopropyl alcohol, a kind of alcohol-based disinfectant. Anya congratulates us on a job well done, but once again asks we give Curly his meds. Jimmy is becoming fed up at this point and berates Anya, saying that he's just trying to get them through this situation. Anya apologizes, and he sends her off to do the grim duty. Jimmy admits to Curly that he understands the pressure he was under now and why being captain might have been so difficult for him. He repeats a phrase from Anya. "Our worst moments don't make us monsters, huh?" Before promising to get them both through this. This time, when we give Curly his medicine, the sounds are far less of a struggle and more one of uncomfortable acceptance. We hear Curly quietly sobbing to himself far longer than the act of the forced ingestion. Suddenly, we are met with red text warning us that it is 6 hours until judgment. Swansea shouts at us through a door, hammering away at it. We quickly attempt to secure the cockpit with a metal pipe and some rope before we find ourselves once again, 2 days before the crash, taking the perspective of Curly. It seems that every time we switch to before the crash happened, we're playing Curly, and every time we are post-crash, we are Jimmy. Curly and Anya sit beneath a digital moon. Anya confesses she actually quite enjoys the nighttime screen and comes out here when she can't sleep. She asks how many days of transport are left, and Curly answers with 237. So about 8 months, Anya puts it. Then she asks another question.
Hey, why do you think Pony Express put a lock on the medical room door but not in the sleeping quarters?
Curly replies that it may be for the same reason that they put a lock on the cockpit. Safety. There's something soft and sad about Anya that night, but we don't have time to think on what she's told us as the vision fades, and we rejoin with Jimmy, now a whole 5 months after the crash. Empty cans lie scattered across the floor. The Pony Express lies in pieces, In the living room plays the grim image of a survivalist's hideaway. Daisuke comes to us with hands on his head, worried for Anya, who has been locked in medical. When we get there, however, Jimmy realizes that Anya has actually locked herself into the medical wing. She isn't stuck. Jimmy tells her to open the damn door.
You were right. You were right all along. I should have done this from the beginning. I always believed that our worst moments didn't define us, didn't make us beyond repair. You think I wanted this either? Make no mistake, this isn't my worst moment. Far from it. This is the best decision I'll ever make.
Jimmy reminds Daisuke that Curly is in the room with her and asks if there's any other way inside. Daisuke mentions the vent and utility, but Swansea has forbidden him from ever going inside. Not to mention, he's still blocking the door since the foam has claimed the room. We try to argue with him, but to no avail, the conversation ending with another fade. 8 hours until judgment. We see a scene of Daisuke covered in blood, lying on a cot, writhing in pain. Swansea berates Jimmy as he mutters about fixing the situation. Swansea tells us to get disinfected, but we tell him the isopropyl was, quote, used in a cocktail? Swansea slams the wall furious, not understanding what the hell Jimmy is going on about, and bids him to go fetch something to clean the wounds. We open medical, and a wall of indecipherable pixel tearing forces our eye away from Curly's cot, hiding his fate from us. Faintly in red, an emergency light glows behind the confusing smear. Swansea's picking around medical as well, and kindly tells us to fuck off and be useful for once. As we make our way through the ship, we notice bottles upon bottles of mouthwash lining the sides of the hallways. In place of the cargo bay lies a grave marked with a pink flower and Daisuke's name. If you pull out the scanner, the grave and door disappear, and a staircase descends in the darkness, a trail of fresh blood leading untoward the abyss. At the end of the steps, we come onto a catwalk sitting above the sea of boxes and cargo. As we maneuver our way through, something makes its presence known. An invisible creature stampedes through the complex, raising boxes in a horrific guttural noise. Making our way carefully through the maze of walkways, we are forced to stop every few feet, the unseen assailant coming right on top of us. Standing still, the stampeding thing seems to lose interest and barrels off in a random direction. To glare the scanner, revealing a twisted and gangly horse-like beast. It recedes back into the dark, and we continue our careful march. After the world's most exhausting ordeal of red light, green light with an eldritch horse monster, we finally reach our goal. The Pony Express mascot awaits us atop a mountain of boxes. In his hand, he grasps a bottle of mouthwash. With our prize, we return to the writhing Daisuke. He apologizes to us, saying that he was the one who messed up. Jimmy tells him not to speak and bathes his wound in mouthwash. We return to Daisuke pre-vent, and he admits that he worries about breaking into utility. He feels as if he's already made too many mistakes. Jimmy convinces Daisuke that they're going to save Curly together by giving Swansea a cocktail of what is essentially mouthwash and rubbing alcohol mixed with a little bit of sugar. Swansea accepts the drink and tells Daisuke that he never should have even been let aboard the ship with how little he knows of mechanics. He doesn't want Daisuke to end up just like him. Older, uglier, meaner. Smarter in a worse way. With a cheers, Swansea takes the concoction and immediately passes out. With him out of the way, Jimmy and Daisuke now have access to utility. Daisuke bemoans not getting a good referral from Swansea when he wakes up, and we set to open the door. We take Swansea's keys off of him, of which are a literal swan token with a sign that reads, "Where the fuck are my keys?" which made me laugh, and we unlock the utility door. Daisuke gives Jimmy one last warning, telling him that Swansea's a real stickler for safety, and that he even taught him what he shouldn't do, but Jimmy just tells the young mechanic to be brave. Opening the door, Jimmy and Daisuke discovered that the room was never actually covered in foam in the first place. Swansea has been hiding the fact that only one cryostasis pod was left functional after the crash. For one reason or another, he decided that the crew shouldn't learn about there being a pod left. We were shown these pods earlier in the scene with Curly getting Daisuke outside of the foam, but this is the first time that they actually really become relevant to the plot. Jimmy tells Daisuke he must have been saving it for himself, and they agree to to confront Swansea after they save Curly. We get a good shot of the vent with hanging wires flashing sparks into the air, and Daisuke cautions just once more that they should wake Swansea before messing with the vent. But Jimmy once again convinces him that this is the right move. He asks Daisuke to think about how proud the senior mechanic will be when he sees that Daisuke handled it. With a final captain's orders, Daisuke hesitantly disappears into the vent. Moments later, we hear Daisuke scream as the power flickers. Thumping sounds pound out in the vent as he manages to crawl the rest of the way through, before we hear him say, "Anya, what did you do?" We fade back in. Now 1 day before the crash, we walk as Curly through the halls of the ship. Our objective? Find the gun. The dichotomy of the setting starts to really work through the player at this point. The dull red glow of the ship in the near future contrasting with the sky blue of the daylight monitors and the bright ship lights. The clean floors and lack of foam reminding you of the oncoming destruction of the ship. As we reach the cockpit, we find Anya. She holds herself in a tight embrace, and Curly demands to know where it is. Us being let go isn't a reason to hurt yourself. Anya, as our nurse, you never got psych evals. I should have thought of that. You should have come to me if you were feeling stressed.
What would you have done?
Anything. Anything. You and the crew are all my responsibility. I told you so over and over, yeah?
I'm not gonna hurt myself. You know the gun is in a safety case I can't open. But I hid the case itself.
Curly assures Anya that if she tells him where the gun is hidden, he'll leave the incident out of any reports. That's when Anya tells him that she's pregnant. She tells Curly she told him, whoever the father was, and the camera sits over a shot of the 2 pilots' seats. Listen to me, we can fix this. I've known him a long time. I'll talk to him.
I know you'd never give me the gun to protect myself, so the least I can do is make sure he never gets it either.
With nothing left to say, Curly leaves and the scene fades. Now, at this point in the story, I think it becomes really clear who our main villain is. Jimmy is implied in this scene to have sexually assaulted Anya, possibly on multiple occasions. Every jump as she's startled by Jimmy's presence, every awkward turn away from him is explained in this moment. We can infer the assault more plainly with the hindsight of the scene of Curly and Anya by the night monitor, where she asks him that very specific question. Why are locks put on the medical room and not the sleeping quarters? This is a huge revelation because it puts into question our main character's narrative. If we have been playing as Jimmy and Jimmy has assaulted Anya, then what else is Jimmy capable of doing? It starts to become rather obvious to us now that it must have been Jimmy who set the crash course in motion, but it doesn't explain how Curly is the one who gets hurt because of it. So without much time to ruminate on this new information, we're forced to take control of Jimmy once again, 6 hours before judgment. Daisuke's bleeding won't stop, and the young man is no longer groaning in pain, seeming weak and quiet from his injuries. Swansea speaks to him, ignoring Jimmy's presence. As Swansea calls to him, Daisuke starts to go into a spasm of pain, coughing and choking on his wounds. Swansea tells Daisuke to calm down. You could have never been like miserable old Swansea. What a tragedy. Decades of hauling ass for Pony Express. Big mighty bruiser with all his shiny tools. This is where it got me. The good life, huh? I thought you were dumber than a can of paint. Always just chewing my ear off about nothing. Useless. Ray of goddamn sunshine. Not an ace student, career workhorse, or a force of ambition. Just a damn good kid trying his best. You could have taught an old fool like me a lot. Close your eyes, Daisuke. And with that, Swansea decides to end Daisuke's suffering. Jimmy yells to Swansea that he could have fixed it, but Swansea admits to him that this was the end of the line. Jimmy tries to confront him about the cryopod and utility, and even implies that maybe it's something that Swansea said to Anya to make her snap. Swansea simply agrees. He has been talking to Anya, and she's told him all sorts of things. Swansea shrugs Jimmy off, offering him to take the cryopod if he wants it, even if a captain should go down with his ship. We are instructed to get the gun, and we make our way into medical. Here, we find out the truth. Anya has not mercy killed Curly. With one last act, Anya claims control over her life and removes herself from the situation. I remember when I got to this part in the game feeling very affected seeing Anya's corpse there. It's such a tragic end for her character, and I think that it goes to show that Anya truly is the character that, like, Curly is, again, a meat popsicle. So, like, it's gonna be worse for Curly all the time because he's a meat popsicle, but Anya is definitely the character who goes through the longest, like, suffering in this game. I'm gonna talk more about it once we get through the story, but the death of her character is deeply affecting to me, and I think that it's incredibly tragic, and Curly wheezes painfully as we input the code from the cockpit and open the gun case. Curly coughs out a frightening laugh, and we go to leave, but Swansea barrels down the hall, shouting Jimmy's name and raising his axe. At the end of the line, we return to the day of the crash. Curly approaches a kneeling Anya in medical, and she admits to telling Jimmy about the pregnancy. Curly panics and tells her to wait, and he'll go talk to the co-pilot. Jimmy flat out accuses everything that's happened to be Curly's responsibility as captain, that he has no future when they return to Earth. Maybe they won't return at all. Maybe the Tulpar will just disappear. We take a third-person perspective as we finally see a pre-burned Curly. A strikingly handsome blonde man with sharp blue eyes and a 5 o'clock shadow. Curly seems at a genuine loss, and Jimmy claims he'll... After a moment's breath, alarms blare across the ship, and we sprint towards the cockpit. Jimmy sits, his head in his hands, and Curly asks him, "What the fuck did you do?" but doesn't get a response. One last time, Curly tries to take responsibility and enters the cockpit in a vain attempt to correct the ship. As he reaches for the console, the ship crashes, and everything fades to white. Now, 1 hour before judgment, we find ourselves carrying a burnt Curly, taking on the perspective of Jimmy once again. We walk out into the living space and are met with a grim sight. A birthday party is on display, and the whole crew is invited. The corpses of Anya, Daisuke, and Swansea lay draped over chairs, and balloons have been raised in celebration. As we place Curly on the table, the corpses turn to us and clap. Swansea appears to have 2 bullet wounds, one in the forehead and another in his right eye. The corpses of the Tulpar bid Captain Jimmy give a speech, but with no words to say, we take the knife and begin to cut into the cake. Curly whimpers and hyperventilates as Jimmy tells him that he believes in him. Jimmy seems to mock Curly for having fallen to the same level as the rest of them, and with one final "let's survive," the crew digs in. What follows is a trippy sequence of events with Jimmy wandering in the vents of the Tulpar, the surroundings changing as he goes. The guilt of Daisuke follows him. We fall down a shaft of Pony Express posters and come across another vent opening, surrounded with 100 fire axes. Crawling inside, we make our way to another drop and land in front of a tied-up Swansea. At his feet lay a gun. Jimmy picks up the gun, levels it at the senior mechanic of the Tulpar, and pulls the trigger. This instigates a minigame that takes place in a graveyard, with mausoleums and iron wrought gates trapping us inside the foggy environment. Inside this small stage, Swansea appears with his axe and attempts to swing on us. After shooting him 3 times, we are transported to a scene between Swansea and Jimmy. The two stand in front of a shifting background, as Swansea tells his tale to Jimmy. He admits to being a drunk for 13 years before getting sober. Over his monologue, Swansea regards the ugly cruelty of being a drunken bastard as some of the best days of his life, and that getting sober and responsible was comparatively miserable. Before he had to, an empty bottle was his only concern. Swansea admits that he knows who he is and has to hide nothing. But a cowardly, selfish motherfucker like Jimmy can't even see his own failings. Jimmy tells him he's gonna fix things, and Swansea leaves this world with a final "fuck you" on his lips. Now, with naught but the corpse of Swansea, we take off to take responsibility. We pass by an oversized Curly staring up at us from the floor and begin to enter another hallucination. A never-ending turning corridor of Curly's seeing eye dies away into a fleshy tunnel. Making our way out spits us from the eyeless maw of Curly, now just a lump of meat. We walk across a corridor and find Curly watching an old cartoon. The cartoon depicts the baking of a cake.
The baker man, he served the cake, it was a sight to see.
Before freezing and offering us to take Curly's leg. The word feast flares across the screen, and the footage turns to black and white of a young boy eating meat and potatoes. Standing up, we play a minigame turning valves across Curly's body. Once they're in the correct configuration, we feed him his own leg and watch it slowly enter his stomach on the monitors. Once he keeps the meat down, we turn and find "Help Me" scrawled out along the television. Sitting down, we take control of Jimmy among a galaxy of stars as he wanders aimlessly. The music swells, and Jimmy walks toward a burning figure in a chair. The figure is Curly. He tells Jimmy he'd like to go home, and that if anyone ever finds the tulpar, he'll end up being the one to play villain. Curly says he could have stopped this, but now he's taking responsibility. Jimmy drops to his knees and professes that they are a team, just like they used to be. Jimmy wails apologies to Curly and confesses that what he did was a mistake. As the desperate scene fades away, we are once again told and find ourselves back in the vents, now taking up a futuristic ultrasound and pressing it to a fleshy mass. A fast heartbeat thuds in the mound, but all we can find are foals. Eventually, the eyes of the flesh open, and the baby is born. We race through the vents as the centipede amalgam of plastic horses chases us, until we eventually end up in a chamber filled with the name cards of the crew of the Tulpar. We walk up a set of stairs as mouthwash bottles clatter down both sides. We stop at a mountain of mouthwash, upon which sits Polly, the Pony Express mascot. Jimmy professes guilt to the toy figure and admits Curly as the better man. He begins to recite what Anya told him about their worst moments, but he's cut off by Polly, asking if that's true. Why is he so concerned about Curly? We catch up with Jimmy one last time at the table with the crew. We pick up Curly and begin walking through the ship, instructed to go home. We place Curly into the only remaining cryopod, and our perspective shifts back to Curly's eye. Jimmy tells him that everything is going to be okay, and that he's taking responsibility. Jimmy sounds delusional as he mumbles to Curly about how together they can fix anything. How he fixed it. With that, Jimmy walks off screen. A gunshot echoes across the Tulpar. We see ice crystals begin to grow, as the cryogenic gas turns on, and the credits roll. Mouthwashing is, in my opinion, a refreshingly unique horror game. I've heard it described by someone, I can't remember who, I wish I could, saying it's like expecting Alien and getting cabin fever instead. And while I think that simplifies the experience a little bit too much, I can certainly see where they're coming from. Mouthwashing is a traditional horror game in a lot of facets, from mostly just walking around and performing easy tasks to minigames and eerie environments. What sets it apart, however, is the way the story is told throughout the game. I think Mouthwashing having a non-linear storytelling ascends the game beyond its original message to something that stands out as just art to me. Like, when I first played the game, I was convinced Curly had crashed the ship, and that's exactly what the game wants you to think. I thought that Jimmy was just a dude trying his best to make things right given a bad situation. It's not until my second comb through of the game that I really recognized just how sincerely just conceited and selfish Jimmy is. Jimmy is without a doubt the monster in this game. Jimmy is the direct cause of each character's death. No more easier to track than his own, considering he, But the motif of taking responsibility throughout the game applies to so much of what makes Jimmy a coward. His fear of returning home with no job prospects, the fear of what he did to Anya, and the fear of fatherhood, the fear of leadership, the fear of blame, the guilt that comes with it. Jimmy is so afraid and jaded about returning to Earth to face his crimes that have been discovered by Curly, who didn't really do anything about it, which is a real shame, but we'll talk about him in a second. And in the end, he thinks it is genuinely better for him to crash this ship and blow everybody up than it is to face the consequences of his actions. Swansea and Daisuke stand out to me as such an interesting character dynamic as well. Daisuke is, for all intents and purposes, a jolly idiot. He is a kid with a good heart and a willingness to pretty much do whatever it is he's told. He's basically a fucking golden retriever. He has a fire to be helpful and needed, and Jimmy expressly exploits this to have him unlock the door in an attempt to stop Anya. It's my belief that this action was taken more to stop Anya from taking her own life than it was to actually save Curly, because Anya was pregnant with Jimmy's unborn baby. He didn't want to be a father, for sure not, and it's the child of an assault, but something tells me that he was more worried about that situation than he ever was about Curly being, killed by Anya, considering she couldn't even feed him his medication to help him, let alone to hurt him. And I believe that Jimmy was willing to sacrifice Daisuke for this purpose. It's not until after Daisuke is fatally wounded and they discover Anya's corpse that Jimmy realizes that it was all for nothing, and once again, someone is hurt because of his cowardice, because of his decisions, because he's not a leader, because he can't take responsibility. Swansea, on the other hand, comes across as completely unwilling to put up with Jimmy, and clearly doesn't respect him, often calling him nicknames or even referring to him as Captain, sarcastically. Swansea is a really gruff character around the edges, but he cares very deeply for Daisuke and the crew, even participating in the birthday surprise for Curly in the beginning of the game. It isn't really until Daisuke's death that we see just how broken Swansea was as soon as he started drinking again. And his mercy killing of Daisuke was him finally taking responsibility into his own hands, outside of hiding the cryopod from Jimmy, which I believe he was doing because he knew of how much of a monster Jimmy was, and I don't think that he believed Jimmy would make a good decision with the last cryopod, no matter what it is that he ended up deciding. In the end, he lashes out and tries to kill Jimmy, perhaps for petty revenge, if nothing else. But it fails, and he is eventually killed, as only the captain has access to the gun. Curly, to me, is representative of what it is truly what it truly looks like to take responsibility, what it can look like when you don't, because he is also an example of what can happen when you ignore that responsibility. Curly is not to blame for the Tulpar incident, but he is the spark that ignites it. By not addressing Anya's assault and by taking care of Jimmy in the beginning, the effect is essentially the same as Jimmy crashing the ship. If Curly had listened to Anya truly and had been strong enough to put his foot down with Jimmy, I think he genuinely could have made a difference, but he didn't. Whereas I believe Curly made a genuine mistake here out of a misguided love for a friend, Jimmy's destruction of the ship is outwardly intentional, outwardly hostile. He doesn't care what happens to the others as long as he's getting what he wants out of it, which I guess is a quick death and not returning home. Finally, there's Anya, who I think is probably the biggest candidate for actually being like just in a horror environment without all the hallucinations and guilt tripping that the game throws at you. She is trapped on a vessel for a year with her rapist, and the only person who can do anything about it is her assaulter's best friend, and he is unwilling to see the true danger that Jimmy represents. Anya also tries to get help from Swansea, but even he seems to refuse to deal with Jimmy, even if he shows a lot of contempt towards him. I think that Swansea is an example of a character who, in their old age, feels like they are just stuck in the rigmarole, in the cycle of things, and feels like he can't change anything. And so he also ignores it. And it is interesting, there's something to be said about this game being 4 men and 1 woman on a ship, and not only is she assaulted, but no one seems to be able to help her. Almost like Curly and Swansea are, in a way, through their inaction, protecting Jimmy. Anya is effectively alone, and to make matters worse, as the nurse of the ship, she has to relive her trauma daily, forcefully inserting Curly's medication down his throat. It gets to a point where she can't bring herself to do it to Curly, and Jimmy is forced to step in. Jimmy, who seems all too comfortable in forcing down the pills. It is like a literal metaphor of what happened to Anya that she has to look at every day, and she can't participate in it. It's not that she's quiet and inept, it's that she's scared of Jimmy. She's scared of him and uncomfortable with what she has to do to Curly because of what Jimmy did to her. At the beginning of the video, I say that she is the quiet nurse, but that was a bit of a lie. She's the quiet nurse to Jimmy's eyes because she doesn't talk to Jimmy with a lot of confidence because she is petrified of him. And she's not only does she still have another, half a year left on the ship, but now they're in a situation where they could all die here, and she's stuck with her assailant and the people who didn't help her. It's a horrible fucking situation. It breaks my heart. And I love the way the game tells the story, not from Anya's perspective. It tells the story from Jimmy's perspective, and as the player, you also give Jimmy a slight benefit of the doubt at first, because usually the protagonist of the game isn't going to be the character who's doing all the fucked up shit. Although I will say that has become, I think, more of a trend in horror games as of late. But I think the point still stands. The Pony Express, the company that sends these shipments, is this overly capitalistic expression of corporate failure. They treat their crews like robots, cutting back on every facet of humanity that doesn't help turn a profit. I mean, hell, they literally are only allowed 1 birthday a trip for a crew of 5 people. The ship is littered with posters reminding you of the company's expectations, sometimes with hilariously over-the-top rules, like only sleeping for 5 hours, or not being able to allowed to do certain very normal things. Whatever the case, the fate of our 4 crew members ends all with a death aboard the Tulpar. All except for Curly. Captain of the Tulpar, it reads to me that Curly would be more willing to go down with the ship if it meant the safety of his crew. But instead, due to his mistake, he is given a far more horrifying fate. Trapped aboard a derelict ship, frozen for 20 years in the hopes that maybe someone will one day find him. If he is alive, then Curly gets the benefit of living the rest of his life horribly mutilated and unable to even properly explain what happened. No matter what his fate, I think death might have been a mercy, more so than anything else. Ugh, and that's Mouthwashing. God, what a depressing fucking game. I love it so much. I teared up during the scene where I was writing out for Swansea and Daisuke. The scene where he mercy kills Daisuke gets me so much because Swansea just wants Daisuke to have a better chance than he did, and like almost sees himself in him, and maybe sees Daisuke as a moron, and maybe that's, you know, a little shitty, but like clearly wants Daisuke to be safe and like taken care of. And that scene just breaks my heart. It really does. And the conversation between Curly and Anya, oh man, it just is such a good game. Thank you so much for joining me on this depressing little adventure. Leave a like, comment, subscribe, fucking L ratio. I truly love this game from the bottom of my heart. And huge shout out to Wrong Oregon for making the game into Critical Reflex for publishing. I can't wait to play more titles from these guys in the future. I've got my eyes on Lunacid. I've heard that that's really good. Hopefully soon I will be able to get the Psychopomp video out. That's the next one I'll be working on. But until then, this is Cal, the last survivor of the Tulpar, signing off. Bye.